Hello and welcome to 21st Century Vitalism. This is a podcast exploring how we can best maintain a sense of energy, inspiration, and wakefulness while living with the often uncertain and challenging circumstances of the modern age. I'm your host, Brett Kane, and in order to do this, we're going to be taking a multidisciplinary approach to piecing together a comprehensive set of practices and views that will help orient us in these ever-shifting times. This could take the form of spiritual teachings, somatic practices, art making, activism, environmentalism, whatever it is that comes to me that I feel is important. For the sake of today's episode, though, we're going to be focusing our gaze on the path of sacred warriorship, as is expressed in the Buddhist tradition. To help us do this, I've invited my personal meditation instructor and friend, David Nichtern. For the uninitiated, David is the CEO of Dharma Moon, an online education community specializing in training the next generation of mindfulness meditation instructors. He's also a Grammy-nominated and Emmy award-winning musician, author, and senior teacher in the lineage of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. He's also, most notably for the sake of this conversation, extremely well-versed in the teachings on universal warriorship. So for this conversation, we'll be talking about just that. What does it mean to be a spiritual warrior in these rapidly changing times that we're living in? How can we cultivate the courageous heart to live authentically and with compassion in a world that often incentivizes us to do the opposite? And what does it mean to be fearless in today's times? And how do we commonly get tripped up in that process? It's a beautifully rich conversation with a lot of immediately applicable wisdom, so I'm going to hurry this along so we can get to it. Before that, though, if you want to stay plugged into David's work, head on over to dharmamoon.com and check out some of the online courses that they're offering over there. I am a very frequent member of that community, so I can add my seal of approval. He also has a podcast, Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck, which is another great resource for actualizing much of the topics that we cover here today. If you want to support this show, which I would really appreciate, you can head on over to patreon.com/21stcenturyvitalism. Consider becoming a patron. For $5 a month, you can help me kind of keep the lights on. It's a glorified tip jar at this point, but as the show grows, there will be actual ways to engage. Beyond that, if you don't have the financial means, that's totally understandable. Just a simple subscribe on YouTube, a follow on Instagram, or a like on Facebook. If you could comment on the video or however you're viewing it, any and all interaction helps us get bumped up in the algorithm and ensures that this show gets to the people who may need it the most. So, without further ado, kick back, maybe drink some tea, do some stretches, and most importantly, open your heart for David Nichtern. Okay, so we are now live. David, hello. Welcome to the show once again. It's a real pleasure to have you on. How are you today?
Yeah, good. It stopped raining here in New York, so that's good. It was very inclement weather for the last couple of days, and I know around the country some people have been literally blown away by the. So right now it feels like it's trying to get back to something resembling normal weather.
Yeah, we're on, I think, day 4 of rain, and yesterday we had like a weird hail snow. It was like that weird in between. So after the 70-degree weather of February, which is very strange, it's
Wow.
been a weird spring, huh?
Yeah. Well, we all don't know anymore these days what's causing what, whether
Yeah.
this is just normal or are we sort of tickling our way into like, whoa, what's going on here. But nature's a powerful playmate.
Yeah.
If you want to play with somebody, that's like, and you choose nature, like even just water. I'm always around water, and water's so powerful, and yet you can swim in it.
Yeah. It also holds you up sometimes.
Yeah, and it can wash you clean.
Yeah.
You can drink it. You're 90% it, and
Yeah.
it can just go like, you know what? I'm mad at you today, and I'm going to blow you away. So
Yeah. Well, there's something about nature that I think a lot of people are relating to, at least in my generation, with the degree of uncertainty. And I think that really leads me to kind of what I want to talk about today, is dealing with this kind of uncertainty in today's age, and a specific set of teachings that I was first turned on to back when I graduated high school, before I knew anything about anything. And that is the Sacred Path of the Warrior teachings. And for me, this was my introduction to Buddhism, which I'm finding is kind of adjacent to Buddhism, but it's kind of, they're bedfellows.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ultimately that is what really set me on my path, and ultimately led me to you. So for my listeners, I've been studying under you for about 3.5 years now, which is pretty wild to say.
Wow.
Um,
And maybe say with me rather than under me.
yeah, that's a good way to. Yep, yep. Yeah. Well, under your guidance.
With my guidance.
There it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
got to figure it out, right?
Yeah. Well, I was hoping that, I mean, if I kept showing up, something, you just like zap me at some point. Isn't that what the
Yeah.
retreat's for?
No. The zap is an interesting thing. The only version of a zap that I'm aware of is that something potent enough happens that cuts into the chain of one's own habitual discursiveness.
Mm,
And so you experience a kind of, well, that's the course we're doing right now, right? Suddenly free from fixed mind.
yeah.
So, whether somebody can introduce somebody else to that experience or just point it out, that the reality we're in is interrupted all the time, uh, from the seeming continuity or normalcy of it. But anything can do that. Actually, everything in the environment can do that. The wind could do that. A power outage can do that. Lightning's very good. Go out in a lightning storm if you want to experience suddenly free from fixed mind. So yeah, so thank you, and it's of course I think of you as a friend. That's how I think of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. So, this idea of warriorship, um, this is something that I think a lot of people facing the uncertainty of today could really benefit from hearing about, which is a big reason of why I invited you. Um, but I think some people, when they hear the term warrior, there might be an aversion to it.
Yeah,
Like there's this sense of, oh, aren't we combative enough? Do we really need more warriors with all the
yeah,
bravado in the world? Like, so from that perspective, what is warriorship as you have studied and practiced, and how
yeah,
does it differentiate from the conventional sense of warriorship?
yeah. Like MMA or something.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So first of all, the warrior use of the word warrior in the traditions that it has emanated from. It's interesting that it's a universal principle. Like, for example, you could look at the Japanese samurai tradition. You could look at the uh, you know, indigenous traditions of all around the world have the notion of warriorship almost always. And what it represents, and the particular take we're talking about it, is affiliated with the Buddhist tradition. So really coming from perhaps the Tibetan cultural envelope, in which the word Pawo means warrior, which means brave person. So that when you unpack that further, the notion of the warrior is somebody who can face the challenge of living with courage and also with some kind of dignity and integrity. So the qualities, as you begin to parse that version of a warrior out, and this would be universal too, like if you look at the samurai traditions in there, there's the notion of compassion built into it, the notion of being a protector of that which is beneficial for oneself and others. So having good discernment. There's the notion of bravery and confidence and fearlessness. And then there's also a kind of complementary notion of gentleness. It's funny, sometimes people who are quite capable of taking care of themselves well in physical domain are very gentle at that point. They've sort of been through the whole aggression through fear model, and so they've conquered their own fear. Usually those are not the people who go around beating people up in a bar,
Yeah.
you know. So and toughing it out. So gentleness and fearlessness would be are traditionally spoken of as the two components of the warrior um, attributes, and in particular, then developing certain kind of qualities that go along with the path of the warrior, which are usually evolutionary, things that you develop over time. And so there's a lot about this in shamanism all around the world. There's a lot about this in European culture. And if maybe it has become diluted to the idea of somebody who can kick your ass, which would be not necessarily the definition that we're relating to.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think is really interesting about this is the idea of gentleness having a quality of strength to it. Is in this culture, most people assume gentleness to be like meek and very soft and pliable in a way that we have a negative association. So how does gentleness relate to the quality of strength?
Well, there are so many different people like you and me, and probably maybe even us in previous lifetimes, if you like to look at it that way, who've explored this, So, and over time, certain iterations lasted for a while. So, for example, Taoism, was absolutely parallel to Buddhism in the history of the evolution of spirituality in China. Like they're overlapping at times, but this notion of being in harmony with nature, with the way things naturally evolve, and not being oppositional, to how things unfold. So, and that usually means an understanding of the two principles of yin and yang, right? And that's quite nuanced, obviously, for people who are studying that seriously. But the basic idea of active and receptive. So in the Buddhist world, there's these deities that have the bell and the dorje, crossed, and it represents, the idea of wisdom and skillful means, wisdom and compassion, wisdom and skillful means. So wisdom would be probably more the feminine aspect, and I don't mean men and women here or gender, nothing having to do with that, but just the kind of receptive quality of being able to see what's happening with clarity and a kind of and sympathy, And then the skillful means piece is usually more the activating principle. Like, what are we going to do about it? And you can see in certain situations in the world right now, just as it always has been, there's an absence of wisdom, there's an absence of skillful means, and there's an absence of compassion. Then you have trouble here on earth. Those things need to be really cherished, protected, nurtured, and not just by the religious traditions, but by the society. So we're in trouble.
So how does one kind of gain this sense of wisdom and seeing clearly? There seems to be this quality of being able to face things appropriately and accurately. And I think for a lot of people who are going through life who might not have a practice, or even some that do, there's maybe this ignorance towards the fact that they're not seeing clearly. Like, how are we not seeing clearly, and how do we make that crossing of that gap?
Well, as you know, we say at Dharma Moon, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things, is like at least including the possibility that we don't know certain things, and that we may have tools that we can use to gain deeper insight into the program that is being run, and how to relate to it from a point of view of not creating harm, not creating further disarray and disharmony, which means tapping into your intentions. Having noble intentions would be a good thing, and then generally appreciating and respecting wisdom. And people access wisdom spontaneously. There's plenty of stories actually in the very traditional paying it forward kind of version of spiritual transmission, in which people just kind of had spontaneous bursts of connection and wakefulness and wisdom. But in general, the general thing in the human world is it gets transmitted and passed along from generation to generation. So it's old age at that point, not new age. It would be,
Yeah.
be kind of some reverence, even respect for, look, millions of people struck out before you got to bat.
Yeah.
You might as well look at how they're holding the bat or what they're recommending,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's some respect for the traditions that we're part of, that it could be healthy, but not in the sense of blindly recreating them. That's stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how can somebody tell whether or not what they're receiving is gold, so to speak, or like
Yeah.
genuine? There's so many different things in the spiritual marketplace these days.
Yes. Well, Buddha said, chew it and bite
Mm,
into it. Gold has a certain texture. You're supposed to test it. In other words, what that means
yeah.
for its goldness. Like people will say, a lot of people, well, maybe not a lot, but there are people who say they have realization these days. They're out there on the Instagram and on the workshop routes, and they say, I awakened, I have realization. So you could be a sucker and just go to their workshop and then go like, I don't know, but this looks, I'm not feeling it, and must be something wrong with me. The emperor has no clothes.
Mm-hmm.
So, or you could find somebody who you can ask questions from. That's my first recommendation for anybody. If they say no questions, I say no, no, no me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to be able to ask your questions, which is the equivalent of chewing the gold. You have to contemplate it and and see if it makes sense for you, what somebody's saying. And then you have to see, what your direction is going to be, what's going to serve you best. So I think blind faith is probably the enemy of this process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any fixed idea that somebody else plants in your head and with a fear thing, like you're going to go to hell if you don't do this, is like, most people should be and can be smarter than that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they may not have been raised smarter than that.
Yep. Oh, that's a good distinction. Yeah. Yeah. It seems like, in this practice, and we've talked about this, I think it was like a couple classes ago, but the importance of being able to face oneself. And I think as we're kind of sussing out whether or not something is true or real for us, kind of does require that practice of really being able to be with our mind, be with our experience in an unobstructed way. But it's kind of tricky, right? Like to be able to face ourselves. And to me, this kind of lends into like the fearlessness tool of the warrior, because I know from me, if I sit with myself for too long, a lot of stuff comes up that I really don't want to see. But
Yeah.
there's something about that process that I think is so important. So, in that way, what does that look like to face ourselves? And how is it that we're not already facing ourselves just by moving through the world?
Yeah. Very viable line of inquiry, and productive, because if you had a friend, a good friend, I think part of the definition of that is there's nothing about them that you don't want to know.
Yeah.
And if they tell you, I had a really hard childhood, or a really hard life, or I had a bad day yesterday, you don't say, oh, let's just skip over that and go have a brewski and forget about it. You go like, I'm here for you. I'm your friend. And the idea of doing that for yourself is just something that is, like, we call it making friends with yourself. I think you could just take that same attitude of going like, if you're going to present any notion of compassion, you should be able to present it to yourself, for starters. If you can't treat yourself with care and respect, most of what you say about how you treat other people would probably be suspect.
Mm, yeah. So how do we start to do that in a more pithy, practical sense? It's one thing to kind of say it, but to actually take the time to do it. What is the structure, the practice that allows us to hold that space for ourselves?
Meditation in the bigger sense, as you know from your training at Dharma Moon, that we introduced the idea of meditation having a broad scope of activities underneath it. People think it's just one thing, but actually it's just a whole uh, um, uh, panoply of, I don't even know if that's the right word, a whole arc of different kinds of methods for doing exactly what you're saying. But the king of all the approaches is just sitting and meditating and being with yourself, with some, maybe they say meditation with support and meditation without support. So in other words, physically, it's better to have no support. If you can just sit up, like there you are, you know, in the middle of a big space, and you're willing to see where you are and what's happening, and you're curious and you're gentle, and you're, have some discipline about sticking to the program rather than just, I think I'll just, wander off here into the woods of my mind. You come back to the look, taking that look. And then the meditation with support is the idea of using some object of awareness that will anchor your contemplation. So, for example, the breath, the full cycle of the breath, the out breath, the feeling of the breath. You could use sensations or something like that. You could use a mantra. You could use something that brings you back to the notion of being embodied and present. But that's a support for the actual processes that you're looking at your mind directly. First of all, see if you have one.
Yeah.
That would be the first part. And then if you do have one, what's going on in there? And if you experience any sense of difficulties, obstacles, pain, challenge, that you don't run away. You don't cover it up with some fancy idea of some, state of mind that's like going to make all this work unnecessary, aka kind of bliss or whatever.
Yeah.
So you kind of get realistic in a way. And the meditation without support is, you don't need a tool, but you still sit and you still recognize the quality of awareness as it arises, and the rest of it's kind of similar, but you don't use that one tool, that one, like that crutch, if you will.
Yeah. So what does that process look like? Say you are sitting, you're doing your practice, you may have a pretty committed practice, you've been doing it for a couple months, and something really big comes up, or maybe even medium size that's uncomfortable, and you're just going to choose to continue sitting with it. I guess what's the prognosis for something like that? Will it end up changing, going away, or do you just have to sit with it forever? How's that good for us?
So, we say first thought, best thought a lot, right?
Yeah.
So my first thought when you asked that question was, I thought of this story that I heard. I read this. I did not experience this firsthand, but secondhand, about somebody writing about a Tibetan teacher who was a very advanced practitioner himself and a teacher, and he was working with students. And he had a group of students he was giving a transmission to in the room, and he looked a little bit like not well for a minute, in this recounting, and students were concerned about him. And the translator said, Rinpoche wants you to know that he's having a heart attack right now, but he feels like this transmission is very important, that it gets it done, so he's going to continue. Now, that would be beyond level. What your question is asking is, when do you go, wait a minute here?
Yeah.
So I would just say, in all sincerity to all the meditators out there, or wannabe meditators, would-be meditators, if you think you're having a heart attack when you're sitting on a cushion, for real, get up, call 911, call your, yell out to your relatives. There is no need for that level of austerity. But if, on the other hand, your ear itches, or you think, oh, I forgot to text Bernie about my it's April 14th about the taxes, or I've been working so hard, maybe I'll just take a break, have a chocolate chip cookie, maybe that could be the ground for you to like develop a little more discipline.
Yeah.
So that we say, the middle way. And the beauty of it is most people who get into this have the ability to sit on a chair or sit on a cushion, and sit up pretty well. And the practice of mindfulness meditation, which is the universal ground, is something that's pretty accessible to most people, psychologically and physically.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed from my experience of having done this for a couple of years now, pretty consistently, as you're taking your seat, so many things come up, so many uncomfortable textures, they come and they go. And I think really one of the biggest things that I've taken away from is that when that stuff happens in my day-to-day life, there's just so much more space around it because I know that it will come and it will go. And I think one of the benefits has been in my interpersonal relationships.
Mm,
If I'm engaging with somebody else and there starts to be a little bit of tension, it immediately kind of triggers this like mindfulness muscle to kind of
right.
turn on, and I can actually kind of disengage or just take a
Mm,
breath and then slow my speech
uh-huh.
and not let it just kind of
Yeah.
steam train into the other person.
Are you talking about romance and intimacy here, or just
All of it.
a friend or whatever? Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the more we feel is at stake, the more self-conscious we become.
Mm.
And when I say self-conscious, I mean literally having a sense of oneself and the consciousness of being this person. And the more that we're in a flow state with somebody else, the less self-conscious we become.
Yeah.
So, there's just kind of feeling of flow, an opening
Mm-hmm.
communication. So it's good when we become very self-conscious. And I would say one of the qualities I had with my teacher was he was so into such a deep flow state that myself and other people would have this experience of becoming very self-conscious around him, heightened. And
Yeah.
he wasn't doing anything. It was
Yeah.
clear to me, and it's clear to me now. It's not that he's like messing around with your mind or something like that. It's just stillness. If your mind is still and still open and clear and present, you become like a mirror for other people.
Mm-hmm. Whoa. So is that kind of the kind of like the chariot of the warrior? Is this kind of sense of
No,
being in the
meditation would be the chariot.
okay, okay. But that sense of flow, that sense of kind of unobstruction, this quality of not being self-conscious when you're engaging with people, it's pretty revolutionary because I think most of us exist on some spectrum of self-consciousness, especially as we display ourselves to the world, if it's through art or just meeting somebody new. I can't even imagine what it's like to just always be in a flow state. Every now and again it happens, but there's usually so much self-posturing that's there.
Well, and you could say all the pain we experience on some level is because of self-consciousness.
Mhm.
And that's why, the Buddha is saying, well, look at that notion of self and even see if like it has a legitimate basis or not in reality. And, but, this is why we don't use the word self, like with a big capital S, or, that there's some transcendent self, some Atman type of self that's like, really liberated. If it's liberated, then it's not there. It's like
Mhm.
it's open. So rather than trying to pin down some fixed identity that's sublime, um, there's a sense of letting go that's more the case of rather than trying to create a new identity. It's letting go in a legitimate way of the fixation that we have and the grasping at the sense of identity that we've created at great risk to our natural wisdom and sanity.
Yeah.
And uh, it's mostly just being uptight.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's most of what it is. We're embarrassed and uptight.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So how does meditation kind of help us digest that uptightness? Like how does that help us kind of process that and kind of get out of our own ways?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is you see it, so that would make you more uptight, which
Mm-hmm.
is okay. And that's what people don't tell a lot about meditation. It might make you more aware of your tendency to grasp and cling to particular thoughts, particular emotions. So rather than trying to jump out of that and go, oh, I'm just going to transcend that, just first to become aware of it, which should produce a little bit like restore some of the color in your face and the sense of humor, a little bit of like, oh, you see it sometimes people say, I was such a jerk there, and they're not mad at themselves or anything like that. They're just sort of seeing clearly the folly of ego clinging. It's
Yeah.
it's 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 not a crime. It's a misdemeanor.
Wow, that's a good T-shirt quote.
Ego is not a crime; it's a misdemeanor. That's
Yeah,
funny. Let's
that's a
do it.
good one. Yeah, all right.
Can you write it down so we remember it?
Oh, I got it recorded.
Okay, right.
It's like there it is.
Yeah, Dharma Moon T-shirts. We want to have them.
Yeah, this
Ego is not a
year.
crime; it's a misdemeanor. I like that.
Yeah, that's great. So, as we're sitting and we're kind of recognizing all this ego clinging while we're sitting on the cushion, and you even admitted to some softness around it. You recognize like it's not that big of a deal. And that kind of seems like it has this kind of like outline, this silver lining of there being an understanding of things being good in a way, this like fundamental goodness. And that's something from these teachings that really flipped so much on its head for me because I've been going through most of my life kind of with the shadow of original sin, or like
Okay,
I
explain
need.
that. You mean you were raised with that? Somebody taught you that?
It was just I feel present in the culture. There was a sense of it wasn't like overt. My family didn't necessarily teach me, raise me on that, but I just felt like there was this sense of like I am not good enough, or my base sensations, my base beingness was wrong, and I needed to improve it. It's kind of what drew me to spirituality, and what I think a lot of people are drawn to is this idea of like transforming and getting rid of the things that hold us back and becoming something better. But this idea of basic goodness that you've shared with us, that the teachings have,
Yeah.
is so undermining to so many marketing strategies.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like the classic marketing strategy is to point out a problem and that you have the solution for it.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, we could still do that. The problem is not that you have basic goodness. The problem is you don't recognize it,
Mm.
and you're not able to operate from that within that perspective. Um, so the original sin. So I'm assuming you were raised in a Christian faith or Catholic or what?
It was Christian. It was non-denominational, so it really didn't play too much of a part.
Yeah,
But
they didn't.
yeah, I just feel like it's even like subtly within like the school system, and there's just it like seeps in from the culture. I feel like.
Sure. Well, and like I grew up in this place in New York called Stuyvesant Town, which was, I don't know how it happened, but it was a lot of Jewish kids and a lot of Catholic kids. And the
Mm.
Catholic kids went to like schools like Grace Church and Immaculate Conception, and I remember being like 8 years old, thinking Immaculate Conception, it seemed like it had a kind of heavy vibration, uh, and the Jewish kids were going off and getting ready to be bar mitzvahed, and everybody was doing their thing in their own way, and I was kind of like just like wide-eyed looking around, going like, "Whoa!" And then one day I walked into the playground with my friends. I've been very friendly with all of them, and one kid kneels behind me, and then the other kid pushes me over, and then they started saying, "You killed Christ,"
Holy shit.
and I went like, "Gee, I really don't remember doing that. I'm sorry if I did." Um, but they had been taught that in school, that
Mm-hmm.
probably that day, and then they knew I'm Jewish, so that was like it confused the heck out of them and me. And you go like, let's think about what we're teaching our kids, and if it is original sin that you come from a place of fundamentally bad, and that that redemption is the process of kind of scouring the pan of that, and through faith, I would think through carefully what, with the contemporary psychology that we have available to us, what the hell are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean to disparage any tradition, and I'm not an expert in those traditions, but loading up the culture with the notion of badness, basic badness, I can't see that that's a good idea personally.
Yeah.
Yet telling people that they have some kind of goodness in them and that they could work to encourage that and liberate and manifest that, um, that's how you raise children. You want them to feel they're good and that they
Yeah.
have access to goodness and that they can enjoy life and appreciate even if it's challenging. So yeah, so I think that's a big deal, a little bit there, I
Yeah.
think. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I don't really mean to, I don't have the depth of understanding of, I'm not a interdenominational chaplain, so I don't mean to, um, create a negative portrait of anybody's tradition. I always encourage people, like, find a path and a tradition that works for you and that resonates with you, and that you feel happy and proud to be involved with. So, that's, but in that framework, I feel like people should be able to have a friendly conversation about stuff like what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
Like, what do you believe? And that kind of dialogue is healthy.
Yeah. Well, I know for me, when I came to the teaching of basic goodness, the experience that I had was that it really slowed me down. I felt like much of my life was kind of motivated by this speediness to be better, to shore up all my defenses, to be the best you can be, which is something they kind of hit you over the head with. But by recognizing this quality of basic goodness, it helped me really see that who I am today, right now, is like fundamentally good.
Mm.
And the ability to kind of own that, I think really takes away a lot of just that speediness that we're moving
Yeah.
through the capitalistic world through. And that's just something that I think there's something very experiential about it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
this quality of discovering that. So for the people who might not have ever heard the term basic goodness, I guess, how would you describe that, and how do you make contact with it in your own life?
And to be clear, it's not that you stop aspiring to develop
Mm-hmm.
yourself or cultivate good qualities, work through negative habits and qualities in a kind of disciplined and good-hearted way. Doesn't mean that, you let harm get caused and people get away with bad behavior, yourself or them. And that's not what it means. So there's two words, and when Trungpa Rinpoche started talking about it in that book you mentioned, the Shambhala, the Sacred Path of the Warrior, which is something we're referencing here, which a lot of people have read. That's a good read for you out there if you want to get some of these ideas. The Shambhala, the Sacred Path of the Warrior, is one very solid iteration of the warrior path. Is that there's two parts: basic and good, and ness. There's really three parts. So the basic part refers to the fact that it doesn't have causes and conditions, which is really an interesting thing to think about. Like, what is unconditional or primordial? Sometimes we say, what exists before we create? And it's even deeper than like the notion of a deity that is sort of existing outside of time, because this literally nobody cooked this up. You didn't, I didn't. It's part of the fabric of of reality of sentient beings have basic goodness as a fundamentally unconditional aspect of themselves. You couldn't eradicate it. You can't get rid of it, which is why people in prison who are murderers and stuff, they have reformations. It's why people change. It's why people, repent. It's why people, apologize. It's why people can contemplate their own behavior. There's something in us already that is primordially present that has the quality. The good is said to be not good as opposed to bad. It's more basic than that. It's just kind of, and it's provocative saying that, oh, if it's not good or bad, why using the word good? That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
But you wouldn't say it's a bad question, right?
Yeah.
So there's some quality of just the fact that we're doing this, that we're alive, leans us towards mostly towards this sort of natural expression of some kind of goodness in the conventional relative sense, compassion, care. But that part of it has to be worked with, you could say. So there's the absolute and the relative. The absolute part is there's nothing you can do about it one way or the other. You can't say, I'm going to make myself have this or I'm going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, beat somebody to a pulp. And people who do have these kind of traumas, and you didn't destroy the basic goodness. People who have been, tortured, they can lose their courage. You can dent somebody's courage. So, and then the ness, goodness is just a kind of state. It's an expression of a state of being. So it's a primordially wholesome state of being. That's what another way of saying it. Primordial wholesome state of being that is part of who we are as human beings.
Yeah, I think it was Trungpa Rinpoche that talked about, I think it was in reference to like Maitri practice, but this idea that like we all love something, like even if you're like a terrible
Mm,
person,
mm-hmm,
they might love tortillas, and that could
mm-hmm.
be your doorway into kind of contacting the basic goodness. But for somebody who
Yeah,
doesn't love tortillas, that's not me. But if somebody's in like a really dark place, just being honest, if
yeah,
someone's in a dark place and this idea of basic goodness seems maybe like far-fetched, is there anything that they could do to have an immediate kind of experience of it, or how can they
yeah.
really yoke that
Look,
into their
look
life?
up, look up, look at the world. Like, I'll give you an example why I said that. I live on the East River in New York. I have 3 huge windows onto the East River that I'm looking at right now. I set up my talk so that I can look up when I'm talking to you
Mm,
and see this amazing river with all these buildings that human beings have built with boats, airplanes, and you go, whoo, and you expand your mind a little bit by looking up, looking out, you know. Um, Another way is you touch your own heart, taste your own heart, Um, go to a playground, watch children playing. Works every time.
mm,
Uh,
mm-hmm,
you'll see some bullies in there. You'll see some kids who are like, maybe having trouble, but you see some kind of energy, natural energy there that is, your heart starts to melt a little bit. So put yourself in situations where you feel touched, where you feel like good music or something like that, or a nice meal with friends. Let yourself taste the softness of and openness of your own heart, and look up at the phenomenal world as it's presenting itself, because it's like, um, it's phenomenal in 2 meanings of the word,
yeah, yeah,
right? Both meanings of the word are true.
yeah. So, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with like the obsessive self-fixation. It seems like from my perspective that that is the major obstacle to realizing this basic goodness principle, is just overemphasizing all of our own storylines, and it kind of closes our perceptions down from the
Yes,
phenomenal world, and we can't access just the redness of red and like how that makes us feel, and just what a sunny day is like when you could go outside to your car, it's beautiful out, but you're thinking about something that happened last week. Is
sure.
that is that an accurate kind of
Well,
read?
and if to put a frame on that, there's always got to be counterpoint and point to counterpoint. And
Mm,
so the counterpoint to basic goodness is something that Trungpa Rinpoche called a cocoon,
mm,
which is a beautifully constructed idea that you're spinning, you're weaving this thing that you think is going to protect you, um, and that actually it's keeping the light out, you know.
mm,
At the same time, it has another meaning because it's allowing you a space for transformation. So that's why it's not get rid of kill the cocoon. But it is that weave of habitual patterns in which we get very familiar with our negative, patterning. Maybe our aggression becomes part of our, you don't never leave the house without it. That American Express. Don't leave the home without your resentment, without your aggression, without your depression. And the idea here is that, um, you have to work with that because those are strong habits. That's why it's
yeah,
called cocoon. So, that's our drama, until it isn't.
yeah, yeah. How is it that we feel like that's protective? Because that's all the stuff that I would say is like the hardest part of living life, is like dealing with all of our own internal baggage. But you just kind of referenced it as a protective mechanism.
Oh, it is, don't
How
you think?
maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
What is it
uh,
protecting us from, if on the other side of that is this quality of richness, of vitality, of life? how is that the thing that's scary, and how is our resentments the thing that's comfortable?
Yeah, good question. It's you know, for some reason I think of lawyers, like what's going on with a lot of lawyers right now, aren't there in America? Our drama is playing out in the courts. And part of that is because we're not really dealing with the emotions, honestly. So, like if two people worked something out, they don't need lawyers, actually.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
want to put an
yeah.
entire class of people out of work, but if you and I could agree to something, we're not going to sue each other, right? We're just going to go, oh,
Yeah,
but you said that. I said, oh, yeah, you're right. That is what
yeah,
we agreed to. So I think the ability to create agreements is really important. And why is it protection? Well, they say you have a pit bull for a lawyer sometimes if you're like going into a divorce proceeding or a lawsuit. Um, and, we're trying to protect ourselves from, well, on a positive sense, we don't want to be treated unfairly. So that's a legitimate, you have a bodyguard because you don't want somebody beating you up or shooting you. That's a legitimate sense of protection. But we're also protecting ourselves from imaginary enemies all the time who take the form of our wife or our kids or our critics. They're not actually our enemies. That's misperception.
yeah,
If it's our imagination, like somebody is just trying to help you and you go like, get away from it. So I think we have a false sense of protection, protecting. And a lot of times I've found, Brett, you can tell me if this is true for you too, just it's from being embarrassed.
yeah,
That's almost
yeah,
the most, if you look at our political scene, it's like a bunch of people who just won't let themselves get embarrassed even a little bit.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I misunderstood. I'm sorry, I was wrong about that. Why
I
don't
don't
you
think I've
say it
ever heard
again?
that.
You know,
Yeah.
you never hear it anymore. It's so sad in a way.
It's funny. I mean, even just clarifying what somebody said, like I don't hear that at all in most discourse. Just like, hey, wait, could you repeat that? It's almost always
Yeah.
immediately cannons are loaded and ready to fire.
Well, there must be something at stake there because, I mean, not to get too heavily into it, but when you do talk about the path of the warrior is engaged with the phenomenal world uh, in a different way than, for example, the monk would be. It's different, a different path. The monk is disengaging in most cases, in the traditional case, maybe not the modern version of it, is saying, I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to run for office. I'm not going to work in a film company in LA. I'm just going to put on these robes. I'm going to eat by noon. I'm going to hold 250 precepts or whatever, however many there are. I'm going to practice all day, all night because that world yields nothing that I. But the path of the warrior is to engage into the world and use the world as your monastery.
Yeah.
It's really intentional. It's hard, but it's beautiful, beautiful idea. So that the warrior protects the society and the community.
Yeah.
You know,
Do you do you feel like this path, I mean, to me it seems like it's way more subtle and it feels almost more advanced because you are trying to kind of get to the place that the monastic is getting, but you're engaging in things like paying taxes and having relationships and raising kids, and I think there's something about that it seems like you're really on the tightrope at like the highest possible point, and there's just so many things pulling at you. Do you think you can get as deep with the warrior living in the world as you could if you just went into the mountains?
I think it's very personal, and I think it's great to have a society that can include both aspects
Hmm.
because it is good to have some place where you can really work on the contemplative aspect of life for at different phases of your life. Um, the idea of a temporary ordination could be an interesting thing for people like you and me that like for 6 months or a year, we just go like, okay, let's see what it's like without all this stuff. But the flip side is that you can't get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And you go to, if you go to any of the monasteries, like they have big monasteries in Sikkim and Nepal and northern India, Buddhist monasteries, there's a bursar. Somebody's got to mind, somebody's got to pay the bills and do the accounting. They're raising children. There's a lot of young children that are roaming around. Somebody has to take care of them, parenting. Somebody has to prepare food for everybody. Um, it's sort of in my dream world, or kind of waking world, it would be merged more than it is in this world.
Yeah.
So I'm drawn to that idea of like, couldn't you borrow one element from the deep contemplative side and borrow another element from the very skilled kind of warrior in the world kind of side, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Yeah.
The person's manifestation would be smooth,
Mm-hmm.
cohesive. They could do anything that needed to get done. They just step
Yeah.
in and do it.
Yeah, one of the figures that I really enjoy keeping up with today is Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche.
Sure,
He's
great.
from the Bun tradition. I have him on Instagram. I mean, that alone is kind of a trip that he's just
Yeah,
on Instagram. But he's always posting about he's like teaching his son how to drive a car. He's lifting weights. He's doing like ice
yep,
baths, and
yeah,
that's what I really appreciate about the warrior teachings, but also just Buddhism in general. Is that what most people associate with it is robes, shaved head, monastic vows, but really it looks like whatever you're doing, like there's no envelope really if you're trying to
yeah,
bring it into your life. For me, podcasting is a part of my dharma. For you, it's
sure.
playing music, and just that flexibility and that openness to me has always struck me as really
All
profound.
these lamas are going on podcasts and stuff like that and creating online platforms. But in all fairness, for example, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, who's a great teacher, I've sent a lot of people to him, and I've taken courses with him myself, and I have great respect for him and appreciation. Is not living the life of a monk at this
Mm.
time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's a third tradition, which is a kind of seriously invested Dharma teacher, but that's their life. He's I don't know if he's creating an entertainment company, at the same time, or a record label. I don't know if
Yeah.
he has another horse in the race. But then you have like Zanzar Khyentse Rinpoche, who's a filmmaker.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be some crosstalk there more as the Dharma moves into the West. I don't think the monastic style is going to, for at least for the present time, going to be how most people in the West learn Dharma. It's more
Yeah.
more the warrior in the world kind of approach.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of something that set your teacher apart, right? Didn't he kind of give up his title of Rinpoche and just go by
No, he didn't give
Chogyam?
up the title. He gave
Okay.
up the dress. He gave up the dress and the lifestyle.
Okay.
So when I met him, it was already 1970 in Boston. He was already wearing a three-piece business suit. The first talk that I went to, I went, "What's going on here, man? This is crazy."
Yeah.
And then he also felt like that he had to be very careful transplanting the teachings, the traditional teachings, in this soil, in this atmosphere. And so, for example, he insisted that we learn it in our own language, English,
Hmm.
so that we had a translation committee that's still operational to this day, uh, so that people like you and I can do these practices in English and actually understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, and then he also was looking for cultural envelopes, containers that would map to a warrior perspective, uh, and he's borrowing freely from Japan, Europe, anywhere he saw something that had that flavor to it. Could you put together a new context? That's what Shambhala is. It's sort of like a contemporary context for what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's a challenging proposition. What form of government would you have? What would the economic system look like? What would the military be doing on any given day?
Yeah.
In if there was such a place as in Shambhala or Enlightened Society, what would people be doing on Thursday afternoon? What's happening
Right.
there?
Yeah.
I like playing with that idea. I like to think that it's something you can create, um, even with a small group of people. You can create that atmosphere. People have respect for the way they manifest together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I haven't given a lot of thought to with regard to these teachings. The idea of enlightened society has always felt really maybe like too big or too abstract for me. But just by you phrasing it the way that you did, I mean, it's almost like we're kind of creating a little version of that with something like Dharma Moon, where we engage in this very specific way. And just like, does it start with the Sangha, or how do you take your practice of warriorship and how does it kind of seep out into the community that you're living in? Is it
Yeah.
kind of like heavy handed, or is it something that you just embody and then other people maybe sense into it and change the way they interact? And
Yeah, that I think we're taking a shot at that in our own way with Dharma Moon, which is that we have a community. It's a global community at this point. There are certain protocols about what kind of conduct would not be acceptable, particularly in the online spaces. Um, there is a tenderness behind the whole thing. People are working hard on it, but trying to do something helpful. We actively talk about compassion and things like that all the time. Who's talking about that? It's like we're trying to run a business in a way that's sustainable but not gouging anybody. That's super challenging. You know, um, it's but for me, it's the only way, because
yeah.
either you can take your principles and put them on the road, or you will have a dichotomy between your principles and the way you manifest for the rest of your life. So I don't see it as a choice in a way. You have to manifest what you believe in this life. Try anyhow.
Yeah. That's really powerful. Just that. And challenging too. I feel like there's a lot of incentive to kind of play things in a dirtier way. I feel like it's easy and that path is well trodden. It's well marked, and there's a lot of guides on how to take advantage of people. But to
Yeah.
be able to provide a good service and then keep it within the realm of actual service, that's it takes a lot of moving parts looking in the same direction, I feel like.
Well, and then there's the Mara, the Buddhist term, the Maras, the seduction of materialism and greed and shortcuts that you can take. Um, I feel, almost vaccinated against that from having spent a big part of my life in the entertainment business. It's I haven't seen great outcome from that kind of shortcutting and that kind of egotism, and so I love art though and culture, and movies and music. Um, but you know, as one of my friends in 12 Steps says, ego is not your amigo.
It's another good shirt idea.
Yeah, I think that's already been iterated. Uh, but when people work together, as in a professional setting, a lot of their cocoon they bring the cocoon with them to the office.
Mm-hmm.
And you're there 10, 12 hours a day, and you go, well, this person is actually being quite aggressive with their point of view here in terms of us talking about how we present the teachings of non-aggression. They're really pushing. And
Yeah.
you go, how do I deal with this without it arousing my aggression? And it becomes something that is like a hidden project. And I've been in Dharma centers my whole adult life, and I see those. I call it. I say to people who work at Dharma Moon, I say this is the advanced class right here.
Mm.
Because it's one thing to idealize and say, oh, so beautiful, and this thing and that thing. It's another thing to day by day, hour by hour, put those principles into action without seeming like, hey, I didn't come to work for you to go to church. Let's get
Yeah.
some shit done here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a funny thing. It's like try to have a holistic business is very seductive to me. It's
Mm.
intriguing. It's tough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're
Yeah.
one of the, I guess maybe like the torchbearers of that, with creativity, spirituality, and making a buck. I feel like it's a really new frontier to try and build this big multi-moving part business and have the ethics and the integrity still there throughout as it grows.
And people are coming at it from both sides. There's the people who are very successful in business. There's a lot of them around sniffing around kind of the well-being, health care kind of zone. I mean, Headspace just merged with Meta. It doesn't get any bigger than that.
Oh, I didn't
You
know
know,
that. Wow.
or they're doing a joint venture. So there, and then Gwyneth Paltrow is doing open-eyed meditation. You know, basically Dzogchen style meditation
Yeah.
in this completely, slick app. So people are coming in from like, I have my success already. I've made my money. Now I want to do something helpful. And then you have people who've been like really practicing, and they go, I think we have to engage the phenomenal world on its own terms, or else we're going to be a niche. We're going to be preaching to the choir for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
So there is a moment of them coming together, but it's a little bit like the dating game right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I could see it being challenging because the people who've been doing the practice and really dedicating themselves probably a little bit more spatial, especially if they're not engaged in the commerce world. And I could see the people who are really good at business kind of steamrolling a little bit, just like, well, no, we have to do it this way. We have to, and just totally taking up all the space that the spacious people are allowing. I could just see that being an
And it
abusive
flips.
relationship. Yeah.
Flips.
Mm.
It
Yeah.
reverses. So people sometimes who are spiritual are kind of, when you get them into a friction situation, they can become bullies.
Oh, yeah.
Or rigid. And sometimes people who've managed their way through the real world develop a kind of fluidity and kind of mobile way to work with situations. So it can flip. The thing is, the reason I wrote that book, Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck, because that's my life.
Mm-hmm.
I want to acknowledge and honor those three aspects of my own journey. And so people like you come along, you go like, yeah, I have that. I can resonate with that. And then we kind of figure it out. What could we create together? And I think there's some advantage to being older in my case, which is, you don't think it's going to go on forever. It's pretty obvious to me. And then you go, well, what is valuable? And I can see that accumulating a lot of wealth is not inherently valuable.
Yeah.
It's just not. You want to have a nice lifestyle. You want to be comfortable and take care of your family, and maybe you like nice things and stuff like that. But who needs $10 billion to do that?
Yeah.
And some people with the $10 billion, they redistribute it. But I just think somebody hoarding that and hoarding that much control is something that has to get a little bit like, is that healthy for them or everybody else? Yeah. So no offense to any billionaires out there. And if you want to give your money to Dharma Moon, you could.
Or me.
Or
It's
Brett.
a joint venture.
Okay. But I would feel nervous if somebody gave me $1 billion.
Yeah.
I think one of the good things is we're feeling like we're earning our way by providing good service to people. Yeah. And some of these companies take on a lot of money and hire a lot of marketing, and then they develop a look and a feel that's not completely authentic.
Right. Yeah.
It's sort of one of the more interesting things that I experience is how to blend those realities.
Yeah. That was going to be the other conversation idea that I had if we weren't doing the warriorship stuff. So maybe we'll have to bookshelf it because we are at time. I don't want to cut you off, but just being mindful of that.
Yeah.
But I do want to give you a little bit of space to just kind of plug what you're up to. I mean, Dharma Moon is a very thriving, full-bodied thing at this point, but how can people kind of stay plugged in and get involved with you?
Oh, thank you for that. And of course, you're a member of our community. You're quite actively engaged. So I would just invite people to check us out and engage with. We're kind of becoming a little bit of a multiplex. You can do kind of more mindfulness based and kind of quote unquote secular kind of course training, and you can also do deep dive. Ethan Nichtern does a year-long Buddhist studies course, year 1 and 2. So if you want to go down that deeper path, and then we have I think probably the heart of our thing is training teachers. I was really thinking about what Dharma Moon has done kind of well. And so our teacher training program, depending on when this podcast is going to air, there's a new summer version of it that starts in mid-June. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could post that in the show notes, the program that you took, mindfulness meditation teacher training program, 100 hours. And then we have a couple of information sessions that are posted on the website. So if you go to dharmamoon.com, dharmamoon.com, you'll see all those things. And then there's a couple of easier things to download, like we did some evergreen content, Foundations of Mindfulness class for $19.95. If you're just getting started and you want the basics, it's something you can do it in your home at your own pace. We have a video series on creativity, spirituality, making a buck, if you like that idea. So we're trying to, I just like gathering people based on their energy, and then letting, I like team sports, like basketball. So, you get a tall person, you put them in the middle, you get somebody who can move the ball fast, they're a backcourt person. And the idea of creating a mandala or a kind of arrangement of human beings that is collaborative and isn't afraid of a little healthy friction, but with a beautiful heart behind it. If you feel inspired by that kind of thing, I would say check out dharmamoon.com, and you'll find something you like there.
Yeah. You also have a podcast too, right?
And my podcast, Creativity, Spirituality, Making a Buck podcast. So it's very juicy, this podcast environment. It's like old talk radio.
Yeah.
It's very cool. So thank you for having me on yours. And how is yours doing? Are we doing well?
Yeah, I think it's doing pretty well. It's, starting from no platform to getting somewhere. It's a long journey, but, I'm having some amazing people on. So it's been really, really enjoyable.
Okay. Everybody come back and support Brett, okay?
Yeah,
he's doing a good thing. He's got a good, good, clear aim, and he's doing it professionally, nicely set up. And I always enjoy talking to you, Brett.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you again so much for coming on the show and just all that you're doing in the world. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. All right, my friends, that was the episode. Thank you so much for listening all the way through until the end. I really do appreciate you and make this show especially for you. As always, that was David Nichtern. You can follow him at dharmamoon.com. Get involved with some of the classes. I'd love to see you there. I'm in a lot of them. So if you want to support this show, head on over to patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism. It's only $5 a month, and it just helps me keep the lights on for this program. Beyond that, you can just follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and probably most importantly is subscribe over on YouTube. I'm trying to build that out a little bit more than any of the other platforms, but following that would be Instagram. So Facebook is kind of a dead platform. I'm just going to say it. So do with that info as you will. I hope that things are going well for you and you enjoy the rest of whatever month you are listening to this in. All right, take care. Bye.